They were all sitting exactly where they should have been. That's what Sheriff Hollis said when he stepped into the Yates farmhouse on the morning of October 14th, 1899. A family of 5, untouched, unharmed, dead. John Yates, seated at the dinner table, one hand resting beside a worn leather Bible, the other holding a half-full fork, suspended in air. Frozen. Martha Yates was in her rocking chair by the window, her head tilted just so, as though she'd fallen asleep watching the rain. But the sky was dry, dusty. There had been no rain for weeks. The children, Ruth, Daniel, Lydia, were found in their beds, eyes wide open. No bruises, no blood, just stillness. Lydia, the youngest, wasn't even in bed. She was beneath it, curled into a ball, her tiny hands stretched toward the wall, her face locked in what the coroner later called an expression of total horror. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle, no sign of anything, nothing except a smell. Sulfur, sharp, instant, and a sound, something between a whisper and the echo of something already gone. That morning, every clock in the house had stopped at the same time, 2:12 a.m., every single one. The coroner's report? Officially, heart failure. All 5, simultaneously. Unofficially, Sheriff Hollis refused to speak of it again. He resigned the following week, but stories spread like wildfire in the dry Texas heat. People said the family had been cursed. Others said they had seen something they weren't meant to, something that looked back. Years later, their case remains unsolved. Their land remains untouched. And to this day, locals speak of the silent massacre, a name that still curls at the edges of every campfire story told past dusk. There were no screams, no broken glass, no signs of pain. Just 5 innocents, taken in a single night. And one question that lingers more than a century later: what could kill a family without ever laying a hand on them? Eastland County in 1899 was a place where the world felt bigger than people. Endless skies, parched roads, and a quiet that settled in your bones. Life was hard but simple. The kind of life where men built what they lived in and women buried their pain behind stitched linens and scripture. You worked, you prayed, and if you were lucky, you slept through the night. The Yates family arrived in Eastland from northern Georgia just 4 years earlier, in the spring of 1895. John Yates was a carpenter by trade and a man of faith by conviction. He wasn't a fire and brimstone preacher, but he carried his Bible the way others carried a pistol close and ready. Martha was a former schoolteacher, educated and eloquent, but she rarely raised her voice. Their 3 children, Ruth, Daniel, and Lydia, were known for being quiet, almost unnervingly so. As if they knew something you didn't, they built a modest home on a small parcel of land near the Brazos River, isolated but not unusual for the time. The soil was dry but usable, the trees dense and tall. Locals noted that the land had a certain heaviness, not cursed, exactly, but remembered. The kind of place the wind refused to pass through too quickly. The Yates family didn't mix much with the other settlers. They came to church, brought canned peaches to the harvest festival, and nodded kindly when spoken to. But there was always a distance. John, especially, never seemed to trust the land. He often left tools inside overnight, as if something outside couldn't be trusted not to move them. But it was Martha who gave the first signs that something might be wrong. A letter to her sister, found later among her belongings, reads, "It is quiet here. Too quiet. Sometimes I feel the trees are listening, more than I am speaking." Lydia has begun to speak of the man who watches. I think it's her imagination. I pray it is. Then there was Lydia herself, barely 4 years old. She'd begun waking in the night, crying. Always the same phrase, "Don't let him in, Mama." At first, they assumed it was a child's night terror. But then Ruth began watching the woods after dusk, and Daniel refused to sleep without a lantern burning through the night. John dismissed it as growing pains, a stage, but there was a quiet urgency to the way he prayed on Sundays, and an even quieter dread in the way he stared at the edge of the tree line, long after the last hymn had faded. Whatever came for the Yates family didn't come quickly. It crept, it watched, it waited, and somehow they all felt it. Long before it finally came inside. Asterisk. The timeline leading up to October 14th wasn't filled with violence. It was filled with disruption. Small, eerie shifts in daily life that on their own could be dismissed as coincidence or rural superstition. But strung together, they became a slow, choking knot of dread. The first real sign came in mid-September. Daniel, age 9, nailed his bedroom window shut. He didn't ask permission. He didn't explain. When John confronted him, the boy said only, "I don't want it watching me again." The Yates' oldest, Ruth, who had just turned 11, began sleeping with her hands covering her ears. When Martha asked her why, Ruth whispered, "He's loud, even when he doesn't speak." Around the same time, Lydia, the youngest, started drawing. Not flowers or animals, but eyes. Page after page of single, unblinking eyes. Always in the center, always surrounded by what looked like branches or veins. Martha wrote in her journal, "Lydia says she sees someone in the trees, a tall man with no face. I told her it was a dream. But Ruth won't play outside anymore, and Daniel won't sleep without a candle. Even John is jumpier than usual. He keeps checking the locks twice. I don't remember him doing that before." Animals were the next to act strangely. The family, dog Mabel, refused to go near the attic stairs. She would bark low, guttural, angry, but never approach. One night, she urinated in the kitchen and wouldn't go near the back door again. Then the chickens stopped laying eggs. Not gradually, but all at once. As if something had changed in the air. John told the neighbors it was probably a seasonal shift, but Ellis Mayweather, who farmed the adjacent land, wasn't convinced. He later claimed he'd seen something strange while riding past the Yates home near dusk. He said Martha was standing outside, barefoot in the cold, staring up at the attic window. Her posture was rigid, unnatural. He waved. She didn't respond. Just kept staring, unmoving. He didn't stop to check. Something about the scene made his horse uneasy. Something made him uneasy. 2 days before the incident, Martha sent Lydia to stay briefly with the Mayweathers. Just for the afternoon. The child refused to enter their home. She stood on their porch, staring back at the woods and saying softly, "He's not happy we're away." That evening, John retrieved her early. He didn't give a reason. On October 13th, the day before the family was found, the weather was unusually still. No wind, no clouds. The air felt suspended. Compressed. At sundown, the family was seen walking to the well together, hand in hand. Ruth clung tightly to her mother. Lydia stared behind them, whispering something no one could hear. The last known visitor to the home was Reverend Alcott. He came by just after dusk to drop off hymnals for Sunday. He noted that John seemed distracted, anxious. When asked if he was all right, John replied, "We're fine, just preparing." The Reverend assumed he meant the sermon. He would later say he felt a sudden pressure in his chest as he stepped off the porch. He described it as like walking into the moment before a lightning strike, charged, silent, expectant. No one saw the family alive again. The next morning, the Mayweathers noticed no smoke from the chimney. No sign of movement. They rode over just after noon. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was out of place. A warm fire still smoldered in the hearth. A pie, untouched, sat cooling on the kitchen counter. And the family? All 5 of Them were exactly where they should have been seated, resting, lying peacefully in bed. Except none of them were breathing. No wounds, no blood, no sounds. Only silence, and a faint smell of sulfur hanging in the air, like the first spark of a match in a room that hasn't been lit for a long time. Asterisk. The official investigation into the Yates deaths began within hours. Sheriff Hollis, the man who discovered the bodies, was shaken but methodical. He sealed the house, took statements, called in the county coroner, Dr. Abram Lewin. The scene was quiet. Too quiet. There were no signs of a break-in, no broken glass, no overturned chairs. The table was set for breakfast. John's fork was still spearing a slice of cold cornbread. The fire had burned low but steady. 5 bodies. No visible wounds. No signs of struggle. No answers. Dr. Lewin's preliminary autopsy notes were filled with question marks. There was no trauma, no petechial hemorrhaging to suggest suffocation. No signs of poisoning, not even plant-based toxins or naturally occurring mycotoxins. Their skin tone was normal, muscles relaxed. No convulsions, but their hearts had all stopped within minutes of each other. Time of death was placed around 2:12 a.m., aligning with the stop clocks found throughout the home, 2 on the walls, 1 on the nightstand, and John's silver pocket watch. But it was Lydia who disturbed the investigators most. The 4-year-old had died beneath her bed, her arms curled defensively around her head. Her hand outstretched toward the wall was pointing toward a deep gouge in the floorboards. At first, they assumed it was water damage, but upon closer inspection, Sheriff Hollis found 3 narrow scratch marks under the bed, etched deep into the pine, not with a blade, but with something rough, like bone or claw. The wood had been torn from below. There were no tunnels, no burrows beneath the floor, just earth. Undisturbed. In the attic, they discovered something stranger. Etched into one of the central beams was a crude asterisk. Shallow carving, a single eye surrounded by what looked like branches or veins, spiraling outward in an almost symmetrical pattern. Beneath it, 5 tally marks, fresh. The wood dust still clung to the edges. It wasn't John's handiwork. He was a skilled carpenter, known for his precision. This was erratic, frantic, and no one in the family was known to use the attic regularly, except perhaps Ruth. Among her belongings, in a locked chest, they found torn pieces of paper, fragments of drawings, each showing the same image, a tall figure, black, faceless, always standing among trees, sometimes behind a window, sometimes beside a bed. In one, a child small with curls stood in the foreground, holding a candle. Her eyes were pitch black. Every page was signed in a shaky hand. R.Y. Dr. Lewin, disturbed by the findings, called in a doctor from Fort Worth, a psychiatrist, Dr. Marion Hall. She reviewed the materials and concluded that Ruth may have been experiencing vivid psychosis, possibly passed through to her siblings. Shared hallucinations, a condition sometimes referred to as folie, a familial madness, within a family unit, but that theory had holes. There was no history of mental illness in the Yates bloodline, no erratic behavior outside the final month. And how could hallucinations cause a family of 5 to die simultaneously? Then came Martha's journal, a half-filled composition, book found tucked beneath the floorboards in the pantry. In the final week of entries, her writing grew increasingly erratic, sentences incomplete, ink smeared, pages torn. But some entries chilled the investigators. It knocks now, always at 2, never louder than the wind. But we hear it. John says not to answer. But the children, I think they already have. Last night Lydia spoke in a voice that wasn't hers. There's something in the attic. It's watching us watch it. Then, the final page. Just 5 words, scrawled over and over again. Do not look at it. The Yates Family Bible, still on the kitchen table, had been opened deliberately. To Psalm 91, the passage about protection from evil. It had been dog-eared. A dried flower marked the verse. One of the few physical traces left behind was a sulfuric residue collected from the hearthstone and beneath the window frames. Dr. Lewin couldn't identify it. It wasn't ash. It wasn't natural decay. It had no smell until exposed to heat. Then, just for a moment, it stung the eyes and smelled like brimstone. But the most unsettling part? The house itself seemed untouched. No panic, no running, no signs of last-minute fear. They all died as if they were waiting for something, expecting it, accepting it, and whatever it was, left no fingerprints, no footprints, no trace beyond the fear it left behind in every investigator who stepped foot inside. Within 2 weeks, Sheriff Hollis resigned and moved out of state. Dr. Lewin withdrew from public life, and the new sheriff, under pressure from frightened locals, ordered the house burned to the ground. The reason he gave? Some places are better left unexplained. Some things better left uninvited. Asterisk. The death of the Yates family didn't just end 5 lives. It cracked something open in the people left behind. Something no investigation could mend. The Mayweathers, Ellis and Claire, were the first to feel it. They were the ones who found the bodies, after all. And something about what they saw never left them. Claire Mayweather stopped speaking entirely. For months, her hands trembled constantly. When she did finally speak again, all she said was, "They were looking right through me." Eyes wide, but they weren't seeing anything in this world. Ellis became obsessed with sealing every window in his home. He hung iron crosses above every door, lit oil lamps even during the day. He began sleeping with a shotgun across his chest. When asked why, he simply muttered, "I saw the attic window before we went in. Someone was up there, and it wasn't any of them." At church, where the Yates family had once sat every Sunday in the second pew from the front, the space was left empty. People avoided it. No one spoke of it, but week after week, it remained untouched out of quiet reverence or fear. Children whispered about seeing Ruth and Daniel at the edge of the woods near dusk, standing silently between the trees, watching. One girl claimed Lydia came to her window one night, not speaking, not moving, just pointing. When her parents rushed in, there was no one there. But the next morning, the window latch was snapped in half. The Reverend, shaken but trying to maintain order, began preaching heavily from Psalms. His voice cracked often when reciting, "Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night. But the congregation was afraid. Many families moved away in the following year. Others stopped sleeping near open windows. Some refused to speak the Yates name at all, as if saying it might draw something closer. And then there was Martha's sister, Eleanor, who came from Georgia to collect what was left of her family's belongings. She took one look at the house, pale and abandoned, and wept uncontrollably. On the porch, when someone asked what was wrong, she said, "Martha wrote me a letter just days before. Said she could hear something breathing in the walls at night. I thought she was lonely. I thought she was tired." Then she paused. "But now I think she was right." In grief, something else took root in Eastland County. Not just sorrow, but fear. Deep generational fear of the woods. Of the hour between 2 and 3 a.m. of silence. Because silence, they learned, was no longer safety. It was what came before. Asterisk. In the months following the Yates tragedy, the official investigation turned cold. There were no suspects, no physical evidence beyond the sulfurous residue, and no rational explanation that could account for what happened inside that house. But theories began to fester quietly, then loudly, like rot beneath floorboards. 3 distinct schools of thought emerged, each more unsettling than the last. The natural explanation, the toxin theory. A handful of physicians, including Dr. Marion Hall, the visiting psychiatrist, leaned toward a rare but lethal cause: environmental poisoning. The theory centered on the idea of toxic spores, perhaps a strain of Stachybotrys, or black mold, having grown unnoticed in the attic. Exposure over time could theoretically cause neurological symptoms, hallucinations, paranoia, heart irregularities. In a worst-case scenario, simultaneous cardiac arrest. But this theory, while plausible on paper, had critical holes. No such mold was ever collected or identified, and the family showed no signs of coughing, rashes, or disorientation in the days prior. And Lydia, curled under her bed, her hand reaching for a gouge in the floor, hardly seemed like a child slipping peacefully into toxic sleep. She died terrified. The human explanation: ritual or cult activity. Others, especially locals, believed the deaths were far from natural. Some saw patterns, ritualistic elements, hidden in the chaos. The carving in the attic, the symmetrical positioning of the bodies, the tally marks. The Bible opened deliberately to a passage about protection. These were not accidents, they said. These were signs. Rumors spread that John Yates had ties to an obscure sect of Christianity with apocalyptic leanings, that perhaps he believed in a cleansing fire, or that he had led his family in a group suicide. But again, the scene told a different story. There were no toxins in their systems, no trauma. And what father places his 4-year-old daughter under a bed before dying? A more sinister version of this theory suggested an external cult visitors to the property. Some locals claimed they had seen strange figures in black cloaks walking the woods weeks before the deaths. Others swore they'd heard chanting carried on the wind, yet no one could explain how an entire family could die silently at the same moment, without struggle, without sound, without damage. Which brings us to the third theory, the one whispered most often: the inhuman explanation, the watcher in the trees. From the start, Lydia spoke of a man with no face in the woods. Ruth drew him repeatedly tall, black, surrounded by branches. And then there were the journal entries. Martha wrote of knocking at 2 a.m., of something watching them, something waiting to be let in. The symbols carved in the attic beam were analyzed decades later by a folklorist from Austin. His verdict? The eye, surrounded by root-like tendrils, closely resembled a glyph found in early Appalachian hex signs, believed to be protective wards or indentations. He called it the Watcher's Mark. In regional folklore, going back generations, there are whispers of entities that choose families, not to possess, not to torment, but to observe. Until the moment comes, until they're invited in. Lydia's drawings. The clock stopping at 2:12. The sulfur, smelled out all of it, matched historical accounts from other unsolved family deaths across the TIS. American South in the 1800s, always remote homes, always middle-of-the-night events, always silence. The Yates land remains untouched. No one has built there since. A preservation group once proposed a memorial on the property, but funding fell through, and 3 workers backed out after reportedly hearing footsteps during the survey. No animals will graze there. No birds nest in the trees. The official report was closed in 1901 with no conclusion. Just a note in the margin, added in pencil. Unresolved. Possibly environmental or psychological. Possibly not. And so, the file sits in a locked archive in Eastland. Gathering dust. Theories remain. But the truth, like the Yates family, has been gone for more than 125 years. The question remains unanswered. Their graves sit family just outside the old, or Eastland Church 5 identical markers, each etched with the same date, October 14th, 1899. No cause of death, no epitaph, just names, ages, the kind of stone you walk past quickly, without realizing why. But in Eastland, you don't forget them. Even now, generations later, people speak carefully around that name. Locals still say not to go near the old Yates land. They don't camp nearby. Don't let their kids wander too far off the road. And no one goes there after dark. Not because they think the family haunts it, but because they believe something else still does. Some stories never lose their weight, no matter how many years pass. And this one lingers not because of what we saw, but because of what we didn't dot. No signs of violence, no proof of poison, no trace of trauma. Just 5 people, frozen in place, all hearts stopping in the same minute, all clocks halting at the same time. They died sitting down, lying in bed, rocking in a chair. As if something passed through the walls and stole their breath. But even more unsettling than how they died is the sense that they knew. The drawings, the carvings, the journal, the windows nailed shut, the looks into the attic, the whispers from Lydia. Don't let him in. He watches from the trees. He's loud, even when he doesn't speak. None of them screamed, none ran, because by then they understood what was coming, and they knew there was no running from it. Some believe the Yates family was chosen, perhaps by something ancient, something inhuman, something that observes, learns, and waits. Others argue they brought it on themselves, through fear or faith or some unknown ritual. That maybe the carvings in the attic weren't protection, but an invitation, a signal, and some don't want to know. They look at the case and feel the void that surrounds it, the yawning absence of sense, of science, of sanity. Because if something can do this, if something can enter a home in the middle of the night and 5 lives without leaving a mark, then maybe nowhere is safe. Maybe every wall is thin. Maybe every prayer is just a door that opens both ways. The Yates family is gone, their story buried in ash and silence. But if stories like this teach us anything, it's that silence has weight, that stillness can scream, that the worst terrors are not the ones that chase us, but the ones that watch and wait. And if you ever find yourself deep in the woods, near a place where the wind won't blow and the birds refuse to sing, look closely, because maybe, just maybe, you'll see what Ruth saw, or what Lydia heard beneath her bed. And when the clock stops at 2:12, don't move, don't speak, don't look at it, because you're not supposed to, because that's the rule. That was the final message in Martha's journal. Do not look at it. And yet we always do, because we have to know what came into that house, what took the Yates family, and why did they let it in.